All right, folks. So, welcome back. This is going to be part two of chapter 19. Um, Silver Day, one of my favorite lessons of the year because it's really kind of confusing. So, I'm going to do my best to explain it to you, compare it with kind of what the book says, which doesn't help much, and see what we come up with. So, why don't we go and get right into it? All right, there we go with some economic chows. Uh, so basically, um, the economy is growing substantially. We have an economic downturn in 1873, the Panic of 1873, and um, by the 1890s, by the early 1890s, we've rebounded pretty good. Okay, so that all changes in 1893, where we have a panic. And this is the most severe economic downturn that the country has experienced to this point. Okay, every panic is worse than the one before it because our economy is larger, therefore there's more to lose. This would be the worst one, though, probably. This is the worst one that we would have until the Great Depression, though. There would be one in 1800 or 1907, not quite as bad. There'd be one in the 1920s, early 1920s, not as bad. Then, of course, um, the uh, the bottom falls out when the Great Depression hits. But anyway, so let's talk about the Panic of 1893. Okay, part of it is a result of something called the McKinley Tariff. Okay, so William McKinley, who later became president, was a member of Congress, and in 1890 supported a tariff that raised tariff levels on many goods to almost 50%. Many of them were about 49.5%. Okay, so let's go back to talking about tariffs for a minute. Um, Remember, tariffs are meant to do what? They're meant to protect American goods. Protectionist tariffs is what we call it. The idea of the McKinley tariff is to raise prices or raise the tariff so high that it discourages foreign countries or foreign companies from sending their goods to America, encouraging people to buy more American goods. Okay. However, with any tariff, there's a downside to that. Okay, and we've discussed this previously when we've talked about tariffs. When you raise a tariff to a super high amount, a foreign country is going to probably respond or by doing something similar, okay? By raising their tariff or refusing to trade with you, okay? Now, some of these goods that we're paying a 49.5% tax on are goods that people in America need, companies in America need. So the tariff is really bad for them because they might be goods that aren't available in America, or it makes it harder to send certain goods to other countries. Um, so that's why having a tariff uh, this high is really risky. Okay, um, with any tariff, right? With any argument, you're going to have the pros and the cons. Um, Sometimes tariffs turn out to be really good decisions. Sometimes they don't work out as planned. This is an example of something that didn't work out particularly well and helps hasten the Panic of 1893. The McKinley Tariff came in 1890. Okay, so what else causes this economic downturn, this panic? Okay, it always results in the same thing: bank closures, no money being available, etc. Okay, but by 1893, because we've been learning about these all the way back to chapter, what is it, chapter 7, chapter 8. When we talked about the Panic of 1819, there's a run on banks. People worry about their money. Everything falls apart. Okay, it's a very different country in 1893 than it is in 1819. But we do in 1893 have what we call a very interconnected economy, which means when things go bad, the dominoes are going to kind of fall everywhere. Okay, so it all starts when um, one of our bigger railroads uh, can't pay its loans and files for bankruptcy. Okay, um, what this means again, right? If you give a loan to somebody and it's time for that person to pay that loan and they don't have the money to pay you, you suddenly are out money. And you may have owed money to someone or something else, or somebody else may have taken a loan from you or wants to take a loan from you that now can't because you don't have the money you were expecting to get from this other loan, if that makes sense. This is where we get terms like defaulting on loans, when people default on a loan. If I gave you $5,000 and you're supposed to pay me that $5,000 back by January 20th, and somebody else wants a loan of $5,000 on January 21st, if you don't give me that $5,000, I can't give that other loan of $5,000 out to the guy on the 21st. He's out money, I'm out money, you haven't made the money. Okay? This gets people all worried about their money in the banks. Okay? And what happens then when we start to see these loans default is something called tightening credit. Now, we've talked about this before too, tighter credit. Meaning it's harder to get a loan. That's bad for the economy too. If I want to start a business, I need a loan to do it. If it's hard to get a loan, I can't start a business. Therefore, that means that the economy is getting smaller. It's contracting. It's not good. Okay? All these banks give out money expecting to get money back. And again, when that money doesn't come back, the banks don't have money. Imagine it's like a bubble that's filling up with air. Okay? And the bubble gets really, really big, but it's full of air. It's not full of anything tangible, so to speak. Okay? When it's supposed to be filled with money. When it's not, it's something that's not there. It's not what it's supposed to be. It's not as big as you expect it to be. So what happens is a bunch of banks around the country start closing because they don't have money and people can't pay back loans, and we have the Panic of 1893. This was a fairly severe economic downturn that wouldn't fully end until the beginning of the 20th century. Its effects would last until 1901. It bottoms out pretty early, and we start to recover in 1895, but the recovery period really takes almost 6 years, which is a really long time for the economy to get back on its feet. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. All right. The other side of this is people's reactions to it. Okay. One example is a guy named Jacob Coxey. Jacob Coxey from Ohio is upset at the economic situation and the lack of opportunity that he and people like him are suffering through labors and things like that. So he gets a group of people called Coxey's Army, and it turned out to be about only 500 men, but they marched to Washington, D.C., demanding the government do something to help the plight of all these people. Coxey wants to march to demand that the government kind of put more money into the economy. He gets his group together. They march to D.C. Nothing happens. Coxey gets arrested. That's the story. Why is it important? Why is it significant? It underlies a lot of the public fears that existed at that time about kind of labor unrest. Okay, this was around the same time, 1893, as like the Homestead and Pullman strikes, where the public was really concerned that these labor forces were becoming increasingly violent and militant, and that was going to be damaging for the future of the country. So you can imagine, how people felt about that, especially with some of the things that have happened, here in America recently. So again, it's another example of public support not looking particularly good on the labor side of things. Okay, and that creates, a lot of tensions and problems. Okay. So this is where it gets a little complicated. So let's talk a little bit about silver. So way back when we talked about Andrew Jackson, we brought up the concept of specie. Specie is actual currency in gold and silver. Now, throughout much of our country's history, our money was backed through a system called bimetallism, meaning gold and silver. Okay, or money would be backed by gold and silver. Okay, so if I took $5 to the if I took $5 to the bank and I said I want I want $2 worth of gold and $3 worth of silver, they would give me that. Okay, and that would equal $5, right? So basically, that's the concept of bimetallism. And I'll get into this more here in a second. Now, how do you figure out the amount? Okay, this is where we get to the concept of ratios, and the ratio here is something we call 16 to 1. 16 ounces of silver is equal in value to 1 ounce of gold. 16 to 1 ratio, right? So if I brought an ounce of gold, I could get 16 ounces of silver in return. Okay, that was how the government figured it out to make equal footing for the value of specie. Okay, for the value of gold and silver. Okay, and this is how it worked in the bimetallism system until 1873. And this is where we get to the crime of 73, which also helped create an economic downturn. Okay, so in 1873, we go off of silver as a standard for money. Okay, in other words, this happened because in the years leading up to 1873, silver became worth more than 16 to 1. I think it was like 12 to 1 or something like that. In other words, if I took my silver to have it turned into money, the government was paying me at a 16 to 1 ratio. I could go to a jeweler or something like that and get a better ratio, 10 or 12 to 1. So why would I take it to the government? So in other words, people stopped taking silver to the mints to be coined or anything like that. So the government responds in 1873 by removing silver from one of the standards for determining the value of money, meaning now the only determining value of money is gold. Okay, so we're now on the gold standard. We're not on the bimetallism standard anymore. So let's kind of explain this a little bit more. Okay, poor people have less access to gold. Gold is finite. Okay, so imagine this. Everybody lines up. Everybody in America lines up. And based on the amount of wealth you have, you get a cup, right? And the people with the most money, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, they have the biggest cup. And they're told they can go into the room and get their scoop of the big pile of gold, okay? And you work your way on through that line, and eventually when you start to get down to the end of the line, there's no more gold left for everybody. Okay, people don't have access to gold. They don't have access to money, so they're in bad shape. This is why they want silver. This is why they want silver for coinage. Okay, so imagine that pile again. Richest people have the biggest wheelbarrows or the biggest cups, and you work your way down to the end of the line. But now you've got silver in there. So you've mixed the silver with the gold, but everybody, based on their amount of wealth, has the same size cup that they had before, right? So Rockefeller, Carnegie, those guys still have the biggest cups, but when they go scoop it, the value of their cup is less because it has both gold and silver in it, okay? Poor people, regular Americans, like this because they'll get their chance to walk in there and get their scoop, right, in their cup. But, the wealthy people, they don't want this because it makes their piece worth less, okay? And that is the whole silver issue that we're talking about here. Populists, people like that, want that silver to be coined because it gives them more access to money. The wealthier people don't because it makes their money worth less. So we try to solve this problem through something called the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. The Sherman Silver Purchase Act, which was the same guy that did the Sherman Antitrust Act, was passed in 1890, and it required the government basically every month to purchase silver and pay for it with gold, essentially, which is what the book says. But basically, it requires the government to buy, I think it was like 4.5 million ounces of silver each month. And that basically, the idea is to pump more money into the economy, make money more accessible to, the common folk, so to speak. It ultimately gets repealed. So it doesn't do a lot of have a long-term impact. But this was an attempt to help the situation and get us back towards a bimetal standard. Okay. Now, simply put, populists want a silver currency because that, again, like I said before with the example with everybody with their cups, it makes money more accessible to them. Populists include farmers who are suffering economically because of deflation and other things. If you pump more money in the economy, pump more silver into the economy, that makes that pile bigger and gives them access to some wealth. So if you're trying to understand this, I think the best visual is to picture that big pile of money as gold and then throw all that silver in there. That pile gets so much bigger, but more people have access to it because there's more there. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. That's the best way I think I can explain it. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So anyway, let's go ahead and continue. All right, so we started yesterday talking a little bit about populism. We'll conclude that discussion today and talk about the most famous figure in the populist movement, William Jennings Bryan. He was also the guy on the previous slide, a younger William Jennings Bryan. This is an older William Jennings Bryan because he'll pop up again in chapter 22. So anyway, William Jennings Bryan was the youngest person to ever get a major party nomination for president. In 1896, he was a nominee for president of the United States. I'll get into more of that later. Okay, so William Jennings Bryan was this really impressive young speaker, this really impressive young orator, and essentially he is the favorite to gain the populist nomination for president in 1896. So Bryan, in 1896, he's a senator, he's a congressman from Nebraska. He's impressive, he's young, and he comes up and he gives this speech that became known as the Cross of Gold speech, where he basically speaks to the fears and concerns of a lot of farmers and common people around the country, where he says something: you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns, you shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. Those are very prophetic words trying to combine the religious ideology with the realities that people are dealing with during this economic crisis. Okay? So the Democrats ultimately nominate Bryan as their nominee for president. He's become the youngest nominee for president from a major party. The populists, who kind of like Bryan's message too, and though he's not really a populist, he speaks to a lot of the populist beliefs, also then nominate William Jennings Bryan for president. Okay? What this means is that the populist platform and the Democratic platform are going to be fusion between the two parties. Okay? Why is this bad for the populists? So basically, look, the Democrats are the party that have been around for a long time. Okay? They're the party that's going to be around for a long time. Populism's fusion with the Democrats in 1896 means that when the populists say this is what we want, the Democrats say this is what we want, whose ideology is going to win out, the bigger, stronger, more powerful party. The populists kill themselves essentially by going with William Jennings Bryan. Okay, Democrats include some populist goals and ideals in their platform. Okay, but since the Democrats are the larger, more established party, they basically gobble up what's left of the populists and cause a lot of their goals and objectives to kind of fall aside, okay, to the broader, more powerful and influential Democratic Party. So that's what happens here, right? The populists like William Jennings Bryan because he speaks to a lot of the things that they believe in, but they also gave up their party. And I told you yesterday that this was a legitimate third party option. But the fact that they went with William Jennings Bryan is a death knell for this party because, the platform of the more established party is always going to win out over kind of a younger upstart party who has some more radical ideas. Okay, so as of 1896, the Populist Party officially kind of disappears, and William Jennings Bryan doesn't win the presidency. Instead, William McKinley wins the presidency in 1896 and immediately starts to work on helping the nation economically recover, which he does a pretty good job of. Okay, the election of 1896 also stands out because it's kind of the birth of modern political campaigning. Where candidates kind of go place to place, give speeches, visit other states, and visit different communities and stuff like that to gain the vote. In the past, that never really happened, and people would generally vote along party lines. But now that you have trains and other modes of transportation, we start to see candidates move around from place to place to really campaign for the presidency. Okay? So when McKinley becomes president, things are slowly starting to get back to normal. There's less labor unrest. People feel a little bit more comfortable that the economy is slowly starting to improve. And we're on the slow road kind of recovery here, where the economy is again prosperous by 1901. Ultimately, to stop any discussion about silver, McKinley officially puts the United States back on the gold standard. Okay, so in 1900, the Republicans and McKinley passed something called the Gold Standard Act, which would put the United States on the gold standard. In other words, the value of our money is based on the value of gold, and we would stay that way really until, well, officially until like Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president, but we kind of moved away from it once the Federal Reserve was created after the 16th Amendment. But anyway, that's a story for another time. That's all I got for today. We will continue and finish everything up tomorrow. All right, see you later. Oh, sorry, I have this too. So give you an idea of what the map looked like in 1896. Very segmented in terms of location. The South, the farming regions largely go for William Jennings Bryan. William McKinley wins all the northern states, and then California and Oregon too. So we also see about 80% of the electorate participating in the election, which is a really high number that we won't see again for a while. So anyway, that's that, and we will see you tomorrow.